It's a delight to catch up with Professor Brien Layland, Chairman of the Holden Vision Institute. And thanks, Brien, for taking the time.
Thanks for making the time available.
And Brien, you had a fascinating career, right from starting when you were, 10 or 11 years old, selling newspapers in the army camp, to having an optometry outlet, to doing, fantastic things for disadvantaged communities. And I was just wondering, what were the key drivers that took you to do what you were doing, which were more people-centered?
I guess the army environment made me think about what was going on. All those people we had in Ingleburn Army Camp, once they had 26,000 troops, a lot of people, and you couldn't help but think that they'd all come away and left their families. There were battalions from each of the Australian states, and I chummed up. And in fact, I was 9 when I started selling newspapers in the army camp, and I chummed up with I'd never seen an Aboriginal person before, and there was one bloke in this particular battalion who he was Aboriginal, all right. He looked to be Aboriginal, and I said to my mum, there's a fellow out there and he's black. Never seen a black fellow before. And she said, because they were from South Australia, he must be pretty lonely. Why don't you invite him to come down and have dinner? My dad was away in the Middle East at the war, and he used to come down Thursday night in the paper truck. He'd come down and he would sit in the lounge, and there was no television. We listened to the radio. He'd take his boots off and put his feet up, have a meal with myself and 3 siblings and my mum. And I think it was there that I began to realise that it wasn't such a good idea to be thinking only of yourself.
And which year was this?
Well, that was 1940. Yeah.
And that one particular, relationship.
He stayed with me. This fellow, when he went home to South Australia on his final leave before going off, he went to the Middle East, and he went to England, and he went to Europe, and he went to Ceylon, Sri Lanka. And he brought back a nulla, a waddy, carved out of the root of a tree, and I took it along to the Aboriginal Health College graduation. I told the story about Tim. He was in he got the military medal, and he moved up in the ranks a little bit, and yet when he was discharged, he was a nobody. He couldn't go on the electoral roll. He couldn't go into a hotel. He couldn't go into a club, an RS, Returned Soldiers League club, And I think all of that made me think something's not quite right.
Yeah. But just continuing on, that's the same way. Globally right now, there are many countries where optometrists and optometry associations are looking at how to change certain policies. And you've been involved with this for a long time. One of the things I read about you was, over a 30-year period, you got the Australian government to agree to include optometry within the medical insurance system, and for optometrists to be able to test and get reimbursed for that.
Yeah,
so I'm just wondering whether you could probably throw some words of wisdom for people who are really low in governance.
I can. because what we did worked very well, but it took 22 years for it to work, so you need to be patient. And what we did was, we didn't get anywhere with the government who were in power all that time. They were going to stay with the medical profession, and they were not going to do anything that upset the medical profession. So we went to the opposition, and each year, when the government introduced their budget, the opposition people would get up and say, "This is a terrible thing you're doing to the patients of optometrists. They can go and get a prescription for glasses and get a benefit if they go to an ophthalmologist, but they can't if they go to an optometrist." And they kept that up. We had a couple of fellows who just stayed with it year after year after year. And eventually they said, and it might have helped, I had the next Prime Minister had his office next to my practice in Liverpool. And so I came to know him. And he stood up and said, before an election, when we get into power, we will pay benefits for consultations with optometrists. And we never let them forget it. And when they did get into power, we were the first people to go knocking on their door and say, "Remember us, now's the time." And a whole lot of opposition from organised ophthalmology, unfortunately. There was a whole lot of opposition, but we had access to ministers that we'd never been able to get access with before, because it was government policy. They were going to do this, and they needed our assistance. And once you get to that stage, well, it's a matter of negotiations, and that's what we did. We had to negotiate what services would attract a benefit and how much the benefit would be and things like that.
So,
how often.
Yeah, so you had a clear strategy, but you also took time. I mean, I guess this whole thing would have taken, 25, 30 years time?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, well, it was 22 or 23 years from when the then Minister for Health, who himself was a medical practitioner, Dr. Sir Earl Page, and we, at that time, we made a noise about it. We really protested about it, and we got so far as to meet with the Prime Minister, Robert Gordon Menzies, who was Prime Minister at that time, and he introduced a scheme which we said won't work. It just won't work. But he said, well, we'll try it. Well, they tried it for over 20 years, and we didn't like it for any one of those years.
And my very last question is, I mean, you played not just a national role, but even a large global role. I understand you were a delegate to the organization that was the predecessor to WCO, the IOL.
Yeah.
And right now, you've been involved with WCO. But globally, is there anything you want to share? I mean, you've seen the trends, you've seen the needs. Is there something you just want to communicate in a global level that would be of use when these organizations look at their strategic plans?
I was the Australian delegate for 13 or 14 years to the international body, and I was on the board, and I was the finance chairman for a good time, and it became clear that they were not going to get anywhere unless people were prepared to put money, invest in the future was the answer to it. And some countries were prepared to do that, and some of those countries didn't have very much money, but they were They could see the advantages of having an organised optometric profession, that the benefits that would accrue to the people of that country. And then there were other countries that had bags of money and they weren't prepared to put any money up at all, or very, very little. It was a matter of, the way I saw it was that you had to, first of all, start with education. You had to educate people, and when they got to a certain level, you could go to government, and you could say to the government, we have a group of people who have completed a course of training in optometry, and they deserve some sort of protection or regulation. But you have to have the education, and that's what happened. Here, we had a body called the Institute of Optometrists in New South Wales, and in 1922 they started running short courses and providing examinations, and then when they went to the government, finally, they went several times and the medical profession interfered, but when they went finally in 1930 and the government introduced legislation controlling the practice of optometry, it was on the basis that that course of instruction would be handed over to a technical college, and technical college would conduct the course and expand it, and ultimately the technical college became this university. And it was one thing followed another over a long period of time. But I'm quite sure that educating practitioners is step one. It's got to be done.
Thank you so much, Brien, for talking to me. And from India Vision Institute's perspective, I really want to thank Brien Holden Vision Institute and the management for initiating India Vision Institute, and also for being a strong pillar for developing optometry in India. Thank you.
Well, if he were here, you would be thanking Brien Holden because he wanted to see, he could see the benefits of developing optometry in India, and I think you yourself have done a magnificent job in developing it to the extent that it has developed so far.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to be able to talk with you.
Thank you.